Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Blake's Books. Today I have another book for review for you, and that is for Taliesin, the first book of the Pendragon cycle by Stephen R. Lawhead. This is a book that I've been interested in for a little while now, mostly because Bain Books, who published this version here that I have, as well as the other Pendragon books that I have, recently reprinted this series, at least the first three books of the series, which I believe they were actually out of print prior to that. And I kind of put them on my radar, and I looked at them. I thought they were really interesting. And then my friend Jonathan Cohn sent me the three books that they had reprinted in this series because I was interested in them. So thank you to him, first of all, for sending these to me. But I decided to give this series a try because I thought it was interesting. It sounded kind of interesting, and I knew it was like a kind of Arthurian retelling kind of thing. And I haven't really read anything like that before. I've read, I think, some of the original Arthur legends, or at least something like that back in high school, but I haven't really read any novels about that. And so I was curious to check this out just because I wanted to get into something like that. And I really enjoyed this book. This is kind of a weird one for me, actually, because as I was reading it, I was expecting my final thoughts to be kind of like, it was pretty good, and that was about it. But I actually really feel like I really enjoyed this book. Like, this book to me feels almost like the embodiment of the phrase, it's greater than the sum of its parts. Like, there were parts of this book that I kind of felt a little checked out. I wasn't completely into it, but there was enough here that kind of kept me interested in it for the most part. And as I was finishing it up, I felt like I loved this book. So it's kind of a weird one because as I was reading it, I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. And then when I finished it, I was like, I think I actually really liked this one. So it's kind of a weird one, but generally I really liked it. So as far as things that I did enjoy about this book, of which there's several. First of all, the premise of the book, which is part of what made me very interested in reading it to begin with, is it's basically combining two different legends, that of Atlantis and that of King Arthur. And King Arthur isn't in this particular book. This is a little before that. But this book basically deals with the downfall of Atlantis, the disappearance of Atlantis, and focuses primarily on two characters. One of those is one of the last surviving Atlanteans named Charis, who I believe is some kind of Atlantean royalty or something like that, and escapes Atlantis before it is destroyed. And also you have the title character Taliesin, who is a bard, who is kind of this mysterious child that kind of shows up and is taken in and adopted and grows up to be this great man, this bard who is known across the land and all these kinds of things. And then he and Charis end up kind of developing a relationship together across the book. And so you have, like, this one, I think, more so focuses on the Atlantis stuff and kind of more so setting up the King Arthur type stuff. And I think it does a really good job of that. And I really liked kind of getting that in this story. Like, I originally went into this kind of expecting it to just be like Arthurian legend inspired, and then it was kind of fun that it was like, oh, this is also Atlantis, which Atlantis I also haven't really looked into too much, but I'm familiar with it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool that it's bringing these two things together that I wouldn't immediately think of as having that much of a connection outside of them being famous legends, but they actually work together really well, and the way that they're brought together in this book is really, really well done. So kind of the story setup and the storyline in general of this book is something that, even though there was parts of it I wasn't quite into, I really enjoyed kind of the overall kind of story that this was telling, both in terms of it combining like those legends and everything, and also just the story as presented in the book, of these characters, their lives becoming intertwined. I thought that was really well done. The thing I think I enjoyed the most about this book, though, outside of just kind of looking back on the overall story and being like, it was really well done, it came together so well, but outside of that, in terms of like the individual pieces of the book, the thing I liked the most about it, I think, was the prose. This has, to me, I don't know that I'd say it is fully like Tolkien-esque or something, but to me it gave off a similar feeling as Tolkien's prose, which for me is a very good thing because in terms purely of prose, I mean, he's one of my favorite authors in general, but purely in terms of prose, Tolkien is my favorite author. I love Tolkien's prose, and this book kind of gave me a very similar feel to Tolkien's prose. It felt like almost like a little bit of Tolkien prose, a little bit of like almost biblical prose in a way. Kind of has that feeling of like something old, like old myths and legends that is kind of passed down between generations, things like that, which makes sense considering the subject matter. But I just really liked the prose, and I think the prose gave it a very strong sense of that kind of mythical tone, that kind of literally legendary tone that really, really worked for me in this book and made it even a more enjoyable reading experience just outside of generally liking the story that was being told. And I liked the characters too. I especially really liked the dialogue between characters. That was all really well done. The characters are not ones that I found incredibly compelling in themselves, but I love the way that they are used within the story and things like that, and how they kind of, the story uses them and all that kind of thing. So that was really good as well. There's a lot of really good moments in this book that really stuck in my mind that I really enjoyed as well. That was really good. And I liked also one thing that I was curious about going into this book is that I had seen it labeled specifically as Christian fiction, which is not something I have an issue with by any means, but I was kind of curious how that was going to go because my experience with Christian fantasy basically is something like the Chronicles of Narnia, and I know there's other fantasy books surely that I've read that have some kind of Christian undertones to them, like Lord of the Rings has some of that, and other ones I'm sure. But I was curious how it was going to be handled in this book. And in this book, there is a presence of Christianity in it, but it is woven into the story in a very well done way that also feels very appropriate considering the time period this takes place in, where it's kind of early Christianity kind of thing. And it feels like it fits. It doesn't feel like something where it's like, oh, this is, something like the author's worldview and we have to make sure it gets in there. It feels like it actually is natural to the story and natural to the characters and all that stuff. It's really well done. I liked the discussion of religion in this book as well, both in terms of Christianity itself, which gets some interesting discussion in here about it, as well as, other religious stuff going on in this book. I thought was really cool. And I think that also kind of contributed to, like I said, the almost mythical, legendary kind of tone to this book. And I mentioned the prose at times almost feeling a little biblical. Like, it just has that kind of feeling of something like the Bible or something like the old, King Arthur legends, obviously, or things like that. Just has this vibe of feeling like an old legend, basically, which I really liked. It was really cool. So that's a lot of the stuff I enjoyed about this book. I'm sure there's probably a couple other things, but it's not coming to mind at the moment. But I did generally enjoy this book. As far as things that didn't quite work for me as well, I do think that, like I said, there was parts of the book that I was like, oh, this is a little bit slow. Like, it was a very slow-paced book. So I did feel like there were times when it wasn't moving quite as much as I wanted, or I wasn't quite as engaged in it as I wanted to be, or things like that. But that really, looking back now that I finished it, it doesn't feel like it bothers me that much, because it feels like it still stuck the landing. It was still very satisfyingly written, and still told a pretty interesting story in terms of like looking at the overall picture. Like I said earlier, this feels like a book that is greater than the sum of its parts. Like, all the individual bits are well done, but when I look back on it now that I finished it, I find myself really feeling like I loved this book. So yeah, even my one negative point is kind of like, that's how I felt reading it, but after reading it, I didn't mind it too much. So, overall, I really liked this book. I think more than I expected to, even as I was reading it. As I was reading this book, up until for a good chunk of it, probably I'd say like up until like the last 20% of the book or so, I was like, oh, this is maybe a 7.5 out of 10. I think I'd give this like comfortably a 9 out of 10. Which, looking at it a little bit maybe more objectively in terms of how I felt while reading the book, in terms of how incredibly engaged I was or wasn't with the characters and plot, something like that might be a little more appropriate, maybe like a 7.58 out of 10, but just purely in terms of how I feel now, having just finished the book, I feel really good about it. And I think I really enjoyed it, and I think that I'm going to look back on this book as one that I really liked. So I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. So I'm now looking forward even more to reading the rest of the books. I've got the other 2 books in the original Pendragon trilogy, which was expanded later on, but originally it was a trilogy. So I'll be looking forward to reading the next one, which I believe is called Merlin, sometime soon, probably within the next few months. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about this one. Let me know in the comments if you have read Taliesin, what you thought of it, if so, if you liked it, if you didn't, what you think of the whole series, if you've read the whole series. Whatever you thought, let me know down in the comments. So that's pretty much it for this one. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.